Graphic Policy Radio, and this is your host, Ilana Levin, coming back like a slow voice on a wave of phase haze. That weren't no DJ, that was hazy cosmic jive. There's a starman waiting in the sky. And in the pages of the fabulous new graphic novel, Bowie, Stardust, Rayguns, and Moonage Daydreams by writer Steve Horton and artist Mike Allred, and with the great Laura Allred on colors, of course, Steve Horton joins us on the podcast today. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Ilana. This is Steve. It's great to be here.
Steve is the co-creator of the book, Steve is co-creator of Bowie, Stardust, Rayguns, and Moonage Daydreams with the Allreds. He is also writing Satellite Falling for IDW and Amala's Blade for Dark Horse. And for our listeners who might not have already heard about this book, here's a blurb from the publisher. Bowie, Stardust, Rayguns, and Moonage Daydreams chronicles the rise of Bowie's career from obscurity to fame, paralleled by the rise and fall of his alter ego, Ziggy Stardust. As the spiders from Mars slowly implode, Bowie wrestles with his Ziggy persona. The outcome of this internal conflict will change not only David Bowie, but also the world. Called a, quote, ravishing spectacle by Publishers Weekly, and praised by Rolling Stone, Nerdist, Comicsbeat, Newsarama, and shouted out online from everyone from Patton Oswalt to Jane Weldon of the Go-Go's, this is the Bowie book of 2020. And I absolutely agree. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying all of the press and the reviews have been fantastic.
Well, you know, January is David Bowie month. You guys every month is David Bowie month, but it's an extra bonus to be like his birth month is also the month of his death. So I think if you were looking for a birthday appropriate way to commemorate, this is a great book for folks to pick up then too.
Yes, there are festivals going on all over the world. There's one in Dublin. There's a library, a museum in Philly that's doing a Bowie week, and it's just everyone's celebrating his life. And I think it's definitely a wonderful time to release a graphic novel.
Yeah, you reached out to me about this while it was just beginning, and I was so excited because I'm like an enormous Bowie fan dating back to childhood. And I'm a huge fan of the Allreds, and it was really great to have you reach out to me. So thanks for doing that. Tell me a bit how the project came together, like how you teamed up with them, and how you pitched the book.
It all started with a tweet about 3 years ago. Their Orbital in the UK in London did an art gallery about Bowie and commissioned artists from all over to draw their interpretations of different albums, kind of alternative album covers, and they had them giant-sized and framed and everything. And I saw some of those being tweeted, and it kind of inspired me to what if someone did a graphic novel bio of David Bowie, and it kind of snowballed from there. The original artist didn't work out, so I asked around, and my friend Phil Hester was like, dude, you got to talk to Mike Allred. He's the world's biggest Bowie fan, and he's been wanting to do something like this for a long time. And so I tracked down Mike's email, and it went from there. And it just, he was very interested, and he had just come off Silver Surfer, and so it was a really...
So now I know exactly when this got underway. So, this was all sort of coming out of Bowie's, like the period where we were all, like just really struck by Bowie's death. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone was really sad, and there were a lot of really great art posted around commemorating his life from his various different personas throughout his career, and so it seemed like a really good timing to kick something like this off to really celebrate the artist.
It was interesting. This was definitely one of the only celebrity deaths that just really impacted me. And it was interesting seeing, I had the friends who I knew were all big Bowie fans who, we sort of went to each other and talked about it immediately and, planned a karaoke night and, told each other about different events to go to that we all went to and stuff. But it was interesting to see sort of who else I knew that I didn't necessarily know was a big Bowie fan. And then a big opportunity to educate a lot of people who had a more limited exposure that it isn't just the song changes
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Like, I think because of the graphic potency of Ziggy Stardust and Bowie characters in general, there's definitely a big Bowie comics overlap. And, but I'm like, this is definitely an artist who there's a big comic audience, hungry to look at art about him.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap because Bowie's so visual in his presentations and in his songs. I think that people that, and because he was so eclectic and kind of misfit and not the usual rock star, so I think that appealed to a lot of the same audience that were into comics. And you mentioned that as death was so sad, and Prince and George Michael died right around the same time within
Yeah.
months of each other, so it was really awful. There were a lot of people
Yeah.
that grew up with all that kind of music. So yeah, it was rough. It was very very sad that day.
What was your connection to Bowie? How did you first get into his?
Been a fan of his for a very long time. Listened to his stuff on the radio on Sirius XM and on Spotify a lot, especially Hunky Dory and Ziggy. I was somewhat of a casual fan at first until when I decided to do this book, I did a lot more research, listened to all of his other albums, read a lot of other biographies and other various works, and really got into his whole body of work while I was putting the initial stage.
Well, I counted myself lucky in being able to see the big Bowie Museum exhibit in New York twice.
Oh, I missed it. I really wanted to see it.
I don't know where else it's going to be, but there was definitely a lot that I've been a big Bowie fan since literally childhood, but there's absolutely things that I didn't know that I've only seen referenced in the museum exhibit or in your book. And there's even some things in your book that I don't remember from the exhibit. So, like, that's really impressive.
There were a lot in my original script, and then Mike rewrote it from scratch. It included most of my original script, but also added a lot more detail from his knowledge and his research, which was very much superior to mine, and added a lot of details from that he knew and that he had read about that really no one else has really put all in one body of work before. So it really is kind of definitive. Even though we have all of those surreal psychedelic sequences, the scenes where there's things happen are as factual as we could get them.
Well, I mean, one of the things that, everybody wants to know with a book like this is like, is it really going to use the comics medium, or is it just going to be like drawings of photos? And you guys really went in there, and, you have Bowie dialoguing with himself, and you have different pop culture elements speaking with it. And like, this is definitely a thing that can only exist as a comic book, and that I absolutely applaud.
I like that it's not just talking heads and this happened and then this happened, but we break up a lot of it with visual depictions of the songs, since we can't print the lyrics in the book, and just showing that this is what the song would it look like if it was a real thing. One of my favorite ones is the scene where he comes up with he comes up with one of the songs for the very first time. It's not Changes was a good one. Life on Mars is what I'm thinking of. It first comes up with that song, and he remember he is on the phone and hearing about a really bad Frank Sinatra song and decides to do his own version. It's better, and he visualizes the entire song in the background as he kind of rushes to the piano and starts composing it. And I really like that scene.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments like that. I mean, for me, who's like just a huge music nerd about the 60s and 70s in particular, and also the 80s, like I loved how many opportunities you gave us to see the Mike Allred take on different particular artists. And, I have his indie comic, Red Rocket 7 here, which actually does have him drawing a number of those other figures in it throughout. But the way he's drawing them now is more refined. It's really interesting. Like, I'm looking at the drawing of his Alice Cooper in your book and his drawing of Alice Cooper in this older book, and it's really neat to sort of see that change over time. And I I'm just so thankful that you gave me, who is a massive Alice Cooper fan, the opportunity to see Mike Allred draw Alice Cooper again.
That's right. I would think that if Mike would ever wanted to do a book on Alice Cooper, I know that they've already done an Alice Cooper graphic novel a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think at Vertigo or somewhere. I think was it Neil Gaiman involved with that? I'm not positive.
I don't know. That would make it better, probably.
But
if it wasn't with him.
If you were to ever do one of those, or the Monkees, or someone like that, I think it would be amazing. I really like how he drew Monty Python and Elton John, and Iggy Pop, and all of those great peers that Bowie interacted with.
Well, I think it's so great that you actually also just really show the bands. So, like, you're not just drawing Alice Cooper, you're drawing the actual Alice Cooper band members. When you have him interacting with Mott the Hoople, like, it's not just, I'm talking to Ian Hunter. It's like, no, here's all the guys in the band. You have them all interacting with all of the other, like, people, and it doesn't make it just be about frontmen, you know?
That's all Mike. Yeah, he's a big fan of all of the bands, and he made sure to get every band member in exhaustive detail in there, and not just the leading men that everyone would know about.
Yeah. Well, how did you collaborate with him on that? Like, you wrote the script, you said initially, and
I wrote the initial script and found a literary agent, and then the artist dropped out, and then I found Mike. He did kind of an artist's take on the script, which was much better. And then after that, we took it around to publishers, and several publishers were interested, and we landed on Insight, which ended up being a really good home for the book. And we collaborated back and forth on that shooting script a lot initially, but from then on, he just started drawing it, sending in ink pages and then color pages from Laura over the next couple of years. So it felt like Christmas every day.
I may have seen an image from one of those in advance and may have lost my shit. So,
yes, some of those early inked and colored pages were pretty amazing to see for the very first time.
So when you're scripting something that's biographical, but not necessarily like this happened and that happened, like when it's being more experimental, like how do you decide what moments you want to focus on and which ones you sort of want to be a little bit more like, here's these people talking to each other about a thing that we know historically, and which ones you're going to be more interpretive about?
Well, whenever there's a reference to a song in the background, either a song playing or a song being written or referenced, the scene where David Bowie's playing by himself because his band abandons him. He's playing Black Country Rock on stage as a solo part, which that's kind of an obscure song. It's a B-side, but it's really good.
I basically consider that like him doing his version of T-Rex. It's like this is a T-Rex song. Like,
and we had to put, he was on a horse, and it's very much a country theme there, and it's really good. And so anytime there's a song we want to reference, we make sure to have it be very visual. And this is another Mike Allred touch when he's walking by the storefront and looking in the window, and you kind of hear changes playing in the background of your mind. You see him looking at all of his future personas, kind of peering into the future at all of the different looks that he's going to take on following Ziggy. And I thought that was a really cool page too. Oh
yeah. Well, I love the way you guys have handled Bowie's brother, his older brother Terry Burns, is like his importance in his early life and then his breakdown. Like it's just one page, but it's like this very complicated moment. And like, yeah,
there were several songs on Man Who Sold the World and Hunky Dory that referenced his brother, because this is when it was all happening, and it's a very, very sad thing not a lot of people knew about for quite a while, and to be able to depict a little bit of that tragedy was important, I thought, for both Bowie and his brother's life.
Yeah, his brother, for folks who don't know, his brother was older and introduced him to a lot of good music and was struggling with mental illness, really serious mental illness, and had to be institutionalized and died young, and it's just really tragic. Yeah.
if you listen to the Bewley Brothers on, I believe it's on Hunky Dory,
Hunky Dory, yeah.
and he didn't tell anyone at first, but that song was meant to be the Bowie Brothers, and changed the name, and it's definitely about him and his brother and their relationship. It's a really good song.
When there's pages that have like lots of collections of images, like advertisements and movie posters and stuff like that, are those things that you script, or those things that Mike pulls together? Or
some of it was in my original script, but most of that was Mike kind of putting detail into the background. Some Andy Warhol paintings, album covers, different things. When something that was in the original script is when Bowie and Tony Visconti are walking and talking about their favorite bands, which you see in the background, but then they go see a movie, Knife in the Water, and Mike drew a little scene from that movie in the background, and it's kind of a black and white movie. And I thought that was
early
neat.
Polanski. Yeah. And I didn't know about that particular connection either. Like, that was definitely like, oh, okay.
I know Polanski's not a good person, but because he was referenced in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood recently in the movies, and so there's kind of a little bit of a connection between that period of time in Hollywood and the period of time of the story.
I mean, that's also like, if that's like who they were watching, like that's not, that's not like an endorsement of whatever. But
no one knew at the time what was really going on with him until so much later.
But I like the conversation with Tony Visconti, and like when you're having like dialogue with like living people that would not necessarily have been documented. Like how are you, like, how do you work that? Like, how are you like, okay, this is what Tony's going to say, or?
There's some artistic license there. We know when people met, and we know they talked, but we don't always know the dialogue because no one really remembers what exactly they said. And what we tried to put in as much authentic dialogue that people remembered as we could. During the recording of Prettiest Star, all of that is really what they said in the recording studio.
Oh, wow.
So we tried to include as much as we could find in our various reference materials, but a lot of it we just tried to be as authentic to the voice and the speech patterns of people in the UK at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, it is true that a lot of these people are very well documented. Like, I can look up an interview with Tony Visconti, the producer and musician, like, quickly, and sort of be like, yeah, okay, that feels right.
He just had a biography published this past year, and we bought it. It was on sale on Amazon, and I sent it to Mike, and I said, you got to get this, and he said, I'm already on it.
Oh, wow. That's great. Were there any people who cropped up in this story that you did not expect to find in there?
The scene with Monty Python was all Mike, and I thought that was neat that they happened to be at the same hotel. He decided to draw all of Monty Python's various characters at once in the lobby. I thought that was neat.
Yeah, super charming. One thing that really struck me, I had no idea about, was the Christopher Lee attempting to collaborate with Bowie.
I didn't know that either. Another detail Mike added in. And I like that he put a little scene of Christopher Lee as Dracula hypnotizing Bowie. I thought that was kind of funny.
Oh my God. And they're trying to schedule something together. And like, it's this amazing contrast between their very prosaic dialogue of like two famous people trying to see if they can get their calendars cleared to work together, while one of them is a vampire and the other of them is Ziggy Stardust.
And there's another scene close to that where Bowie in full Ziggy gear jumps on a plane and flies to see Elvis in New York. And I thought that scene turned out really neat because he's not only is he afraid of flying and it's a horrible plane flight, but then he goes and sits in the front row and gets to see Elvis, and apparently their eyes met for a second, and that's as close as they got to meeting each other.
Oh man! Well, I loved the way the story that you guys have with Bowie's last airplane flight for at least a long period of time.
We put a little Twilight Zone in there because it was so much turbulence, and he hated it, the flight so much that he vowed never to fly again after that.
I mean, yeah. And then, of course, train travel became significant in how he wrote later albums in the 70s. But
plus, he took a lot of boats as well. When he went from the UK tour to the American tour, he took Queen Elizabeth II while the rest of the band flew.
Yeah, and you had some interesting stuff from that. I always had a hard time struggling with, like, I mean, it's interesting, actually. I should ask you, like, you guys chose, obviously you're focusing on the Ziggy Stardust period in part because it has some of the most outrageous visuals to draw on. And, Ziggy looks a great deal like a science fiction hero and superhero himself. But you're focusing on, like, that whole life cycle of the character from the beginning and the end as that particular window. Like, how did you sort of narrow down what you were going to focus on?
Well, it started with the framing sequence of the Hammersmith Odeon for the final performance as Ziggy, captured in the Ziggy Stardust movie, and kind of started at the end there, talking about his final speech and revealing a few words from it every so often throughout the book, and then flashing back to his life from there. And it seems like a really good frame for the first third to half of his career, to just kind of frame the whole thing there. If we were to ever come back and do more Bowie in another volume, then of course we would cover the Thin White Duke and all of the other eras there that took place after.
Mm-hmm. Do you? It was interesting. Like I'm always sad when it ends, but you gave us a really nice long send off afterwards.
Another thing that I'm going to give Mike full credit for is that he did this epilogue where he did ask for feedback of what's some things I can include here, and I threw a bunch of stuff at him and he put it all in there about different things that Bowie did in his life, one panel at a time thereafter. So there's so many in there that I don't even know half of what they are, but I really like that he included things like Twin Peaks and The Prestige, and things like that in there, as well as all of his later Labyrinth and all of the other various media appearances that he had.
Well, what was an interesting piece of ephemera that you sort of uncovered in your research that you just did not expect to see?
I think how Bowie and Angie first met at publicist's office, and then immediately went to immediately went to a rock concert. I can't remember the name of the band off the top of my head. They immediately went to a concert and hung out there, and then went back to his place afterward, and they had a really interesting relationship. And so being able to capture the initial stages of their kind of tumultuous marriage was a lot of fun.
Definitely. Yeah, and she's very vocal in this, and has a lot of personality and agency, which matches reality. So
she helped come up with his hairstyle and his fashion, and a lot of the stuff that made Ziggy is definitely credited her, and rightly so.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like you did a good job with the voices. I mean, Mick Ronson is definitely someone I've listened to a fair amount, and listened to Mark Bolan a lot. And I'm like, yep, nope, that feels like those are sounds like them to me.
The Ronson scene that I like is one of the very first concerts that the Spiders ever do together, which was recorded. So I took a lot of that from the actual recording bootleg, and Mick Ronson's kind of a very shy person in public on stage, and he always tries to introduce him at first, and you can't hear the guitarist say anything, so he's like, "Can you step up to the microphone a little bit more so you can hear your voice?" And so we kind of captured that, and of course Mark Bolan appears throughout the book. He's kind of a frenemy and kind of drifts in and out of Bowie's life. He's there when they first put on the costumes in what's considered one of the very first glam rock concerts of all time. That the whole audience was indifferent except for him, and he's up there in a gladiator costume in front of the stage, rocking out with them. So I thought that was cool.
I never on the one hand I understood the frenemy thing. On the other hand, I don't they just. They were doing similar things for a period of time, but they weren't doing the same thing. And then, T-Rex kind of stayed doing one thing, and Bowie went and did more things. I don't understand how that's a competition. I always wonder if that was just the press making it into a thing.
I think it was probably overblown that they were actually friends, but I think that they were trying to make sure that they didn't bite off of each other, they didn't copy each other's work, and that they were trying to stay as independent of each other as they could, so they wouldn't be accused of ripping each other off. Even though there are songs that Bowie specifically does of his voice, Mark Bolan's voice.
Oh yeah.
So he's definitely referencing him in some way, whether either to make fun of him or as an homage. It's hard to say.
Yeah, that is really real. But and Bowie does homages. Queen Bitch is him doing Lou Reed, and I loved how you have Lou Reed being like, I really like that song, Queen Bitch. It's like, yeah, I don't know if Lou Reed ever said that, but one hopes.
That's right. And I like the scene where he meets Martha Hoople and gives them all the young dudes, and originally. And of course, his interfering manager prevents them from working together after that, even though they really wanted to. And no one knew that he kind of shut that whole thing down. But I thought Allred really drew the whole band well, and of course that song's amazing. So,
I mean, I the fact that it was the song "Drive-In Saturday" that he wanted Martha Hoople to do is like, oh yeah, no, that's awesome. That's that would be a good song for them to do.
That would have been great.
And I also didn't, people don't know, Bowie giving them all the young dudes is why Mott the Hoople didn't break up right away, and then we got more amazing music. And I loved that he went on, that Ian Hunter went on to keep doing stuff with Mick Ronson, and just they had such a huge impact on glam, on hair metal, glam metal, whatever you want to call that much maligned genre. That's actually awesome. And yeah, you just sort of see all these connections through the story, and the comic can really do that in these splash pages and in these different paneled scenes.
I like that he saved their career because he really liked the band and gave them this hit song, and then much later, when David Bowie's career was kind of in the tubes, Trent Reznor comes along and says, "Hey, why don't we do a tour where we each take half the stage?" And he kind of saved Bowie's career in turn. I thought that was pretty amazing.
I saw that tour. I'm extraordinarily lucky. I got to see them doing Outside at Merriweather Post Pavilion in 1990, whatever it was. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm jealous. I never got to see Bowie live, but I would have liked to have seen him during that period, because there's a lot of underrated music during the later period Bowie that not a lot of people know about, but there's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and I think the finality of his death was a moment where I was like, okay, Ilana, there's albums of his that you haven't really focused on because it's so easy for you to just go back and play ones that you already love. You're going to sit here and you're going to listen to the stuff that you assumed you wouldn't really like, and just give it another try. And, I definitely expanded the albums that were in my regular play as a result of that.
Yeah, I really like Earthling. I like Outside. I like a lot of those other later ones. Of course, Black Star is really amazing. There's a lot of good stuff towards the end. He wasn't selling that well, but it was still really critically acclaimed. And if people that are kind of casual Bowie fans, like myself initially, that only really listen to Hunky Dory, ever want to go on Spotify and check out some of those later albums, they're pretty good. I especially like the song "I'm Afraid of Americans," but the album the album version is only okay. But when Trent Reznor came along and remixed it for the deluxe edition as a single, and that's the version that became the amazing music hit video and big hit, his biggest later hit. And that I remember listening to that song in college and really kind of rediscovering the later period Bowie then, and what that video was playing over and over again on MTV2, which was on everyone's TV in college, and I thought that was really neat.
Oh yeah, I got to see Woody Woodmansey, the drummer from the Spiders of Mars, play him and Tony Visconti and some additional people just play The Man Who Sold the World album, start to finish, plus some additional songs, not long, just a couple of weeks after Bowie died. And I was really wondering how they were going to handle the vocals, right? And I don't remember the name of the singer, but I actually think they did it right. He was he was a British guy from a new wave band that I'd actually heard of from the 80s. And he didn't sound like Bowie, but he was inspired by Bowie because, he was a British new wave guy. And he had the right accent. And so it was like, yeah, no, this works. It wasn't like an impersonation, but it was like coming from the same planet in a way.
I really would like to see Holy Holy in person. I think that would be...
yes, it's called Holy Holy, yeah.
That would be really fun to see them, especially since Man Who Sold the World was really never toured much. And so a lot of those songs were really played live until Woody got a hold of them. And I think that would be really cool to see that whole album played. Plus his bio, his auto bio, was one of our many sources, and he had a lot of really good first-hand accounts in there. And so it's an excellent read.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the only one of the Spiders who I really know anything about is Mick Ronson. I have to admit, not as knowledgeable about the others.
He did have a short-lived solo career afterward, and played with many other artists, and wrote a lot of music and performed a lot. He had a really nice career post Bowie, and of course he's really still underrated. Not a lot of people know who he is or what impact he had on Bowie and music in general. He's definitely one of the unsung great guitarists. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some solos that are just amazing. And yeah, I mean, all of Bowie's guitarists were. I have a playlist of like my favorite rock guitar solos, and like a lot of them are from different Bowie albums, and it's not even necessarily the same person, but he's just working with amazing artists. So. Sorry, I realize like we could just talk about how amazing Bowie is the whole time, but I'm wondering actually, like, if we have listeners out there who are just sort of like, they've listened to the Greatest Hits album, which is called Changes Bowie, which, as a wonderful segment from the Venture Brothers cartoon is here to remind you, is a compilation and is not an album. Where do you, I obviously we're going to be like, you should listen to Rise and Fall of Spiders of Mars, because that's like the album that's at the heart of this book. But where would you say folks should go as their number two? Do folks go to Aladdin Sane, or do you want folks go to earlier to Hunky Dory?
If you want to kind of really get a sense of the book itself, then listening to Ziggy Stardust and then Aladdin Sane kind of covers most of it. But if you want to become a fan of Bowie, apart from the book, then going back to Hunky Dory, The Man Who Sold the World, and then jumping ahead to Diamond Dogs.
So good.
And some of the later ones like Young Americans and Scary Monsters is a really good way to kind of capture the whole Thin White Duke era. And so there's a lot of great stuff there too.
I mean, I think like David Bowie does so much science fiction in his music, and I want people who are like coming at this from the comics to consider like looking at it and addressing it that way. Like, Diamond Dogs, and you mentioned it in the book, is like is actual dystopian book. He wanted to do George Orwell's 1984. I'm actually glad he didn't, because what we got was something that's significantly different and interesting in its own way.
Yeah, and we kind of gave, as far as the science fiction goes, we kind of gave it Steve Ditko, Doctor Strange feel in parts of the book to kind of give that psychedelic viewpoint. When Bowie actually meets Ziggy Stardust toward the very end of the first half of the book, and kind of they have a conversation, and I thought that was really kind of a weird sci-fi way to introduce that persona for the first time before he gets on stage with it.
It definitely also reminded me of the Mike Allred Red Rocket 7, because in Red Rocket 7 you have this alien who is sort of going through music history and inspiring people and like running away from his home planet, and it felt like, I don't know, that conversation definitely reminded me of that too. For sure.
And when I remember writing that scene with Allred in mind, so I must have written a little bit more of the script in between the initial draft and before he signed on officially. But I wanted to wanted to make sure he drew that, and when it came out, those pages came back. It was pretty much how I pictured an Allred Doctor Strange scene in my head. So I was reading Silver Surfer at the time, so that was definitely in my head there.
His art was so good on that book.
It was so great. It's probably the best Silver Surfer. I know there's a lot of competition with Kirby and John Buscema and Mobius, but I still think Allred is probably the new king for as far as Silver Surfer art goes.
It's interesting because there's a lot of Marvel comics in particular are referenced in a lot of psychedelic and prog rock from England, despite the fact that comics were really freaking expensive. American comics were really expensive over there. But I'm trying to think of a specific Bowie reference to a specific comic thing, and I'm drawing a blank. And I'm sure as soon as I get off this interview.
There is a song on one of his later albums that actually references Seeing My Life in a Comic. I can't remember the name of the track, but Mike would know.
The song is New Killer Star from the album Reality.
Oh, and Mike Allred thinks that might have been a reference to Red Rocket 7. He's not positive, but he likes to think that Bowie saw himself depicted in that comic and approved.
That's awesome. But you made me think of that because there's a Doctor Strange comic in the collage on the cover of an early Floyd album, for example, where if you look at it carefully enough, you're like, that's Doctor Strange, underneath various layers of weird collage. And I'm thankful that Disney hasn't sued Roger Waters, I guess, at this point. So.
Oh, there was an artist named Rick Satriani who wasn't really prog rock, but he did an album called Surfing with the Alien.
Yes.
And it was definitely a Silver Surfer cover that he used, and he got away with it.
Damn. Power to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have got a few questions that were sent in to me from the listenership, or the potential listenership, as it were. Curious whether they've had any comments from Bowie's kids. I mean, the book just came out, so I'm not sure how that would be, but.
Well, fancy that you mentioned that because Neil Gaiman tweeted, to our surprise, that the Bowie estate loves the book. He said those exact words. So,
yes.
So from what we can tell, Duncan really likes the book, and we're hoping that he liked how his father was depicted in it, and we hope the rest of the family loves it as well.
Well, he's working on some graphic novel stuff right now with Alex DeCampi. So
I know what a great dream team. I think that whatever they produce is going to be magic. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely.
He's been tweeting a lot about fair pay for artists, so I think that I'm really happy that the team on that is going to be paid well, and that he's kind of leading the way of the discussion about, hey, in comics, these artists really aren't being paid enough, and I think you guys should pay them more. That's great. Yeah,
definitely. And talking about fair pay with artistic creation is definitely a thing that comes up in your book as well.
There was a scene toward the end of the Spider's life during the last leg of the tour where the Spiders find out how much they're making and get very upset and kind of confront the manager, who's kind of indifferent. It's hostile, and it really led to the breakup of the band because there wasn't really much money going around because the manager was taking a lot of it. And so that was one of the big reasons that the Spiders went their separate ways. And little did they know that Rano had his own separate deal with the manager and Tony DeFries, and kind of in a way betrayed the rest of the band and went off on his own and wasn't really with them because he had his own lucrative deal on the side and did his own solo stuff after that, and kind of left the rest of the Spiders to find their own way.
But what I loved is the fact that it was, the American artist, the American touring musician who was joining in to do piano was the one who helped them realize it. And he was like, well, my rates are higher because I'm in the musicians union. And it's always been a challenge. I used to work for the musicians union. It's always been a challenge sort of getting that into the rock music space, whereas, orchestras and then studio artists and Broadway pit bands and stuff like that were always part of it. there was a much more complicated, there's a book about it actually, situation between rock musicians and the musicians union. But it just shows you like, yeah, if organizing and having actual like minimum standards make the big difference.
I know a lot of those musicians didn't realize at the time in the 70s and 80s that their managers were taking such a big cut and they weren't making nearly as much money as they were supposed to be making. And a lot of those guys got signed bad contracts and it got screwed. I mean, going all the way up to groups like NWA, which I just saw the movie of, and how they were taken advantage of. And it's very, very common in the industry. And I think that hopefully artists are a little smarter today and have a little better lawyers and better eye on the ball there, and they're not getting taken for a ride like they used to be.
Another listener question was, will there be an MCR, My Chemical Romance comic book? I remember, and they also said, and they were referencing, they remembered the old Kiss comics. I my thought on that obviously was like, MCR, like Gerard Way is like making his own comics, but
I would love to do one. I've talked to an artist named Melissa Karcher, and who's a huge MCR fan, and she's done fan art there. And I approached her and said, why don't we pitch a MCR bio around? And I didn't really get any traction with that, but would still like to do one of those someday, hopefully with Gerard's blessing. Just because they're another band that's extremely visual and would make an amazing graphic novel. So whether he Gerard Way ends up doing one himself about the band, which he kind of sort of did with the Killjoys comic at Dark Horse, where it was more kind of a fictional persona of them. But if he ever decided to do an actual biography of them as a graphic novel where either he wrote or oversaw with a different writer and artist, I think it would probably be a bestseller.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm just a little bit too old to be as into MCR as like the MCR fans are, but that's definitely a comic with a huge listenership a band with a huge listenership among comics readers. So
I'm old too, but you should listen to the Welcome to the Black Parade.
I just didn't like it that much. I was like, this is fine. Like, I don't know. My response to it was literally like, this is fine.
Mm-hmm. I like a lot of newer artists as well as older stuff. If I turn on the Alternative Nation station on XM, there's still a lot of great music in there. So even though I'm still a huge classic rock fan, as you know, there are a lot of recent bands that there's some bands that kind of throw back to that era. And so they're a lot of fun to listen to, even for people whose kind of music tastes ended in 1989.
Well, you're definitely thinking about, additional graphic novel work around musicians and artists, I take it?
Immediately after selling this book, I put together a Freddie Mercury one, found a great artist, pitched it around to all the publishers. Didn't get any takers. I think the movie coming out around then and not doing too well critically kind of had a lot to do with it. I would still like to do it.
That has nothing to do with that. It's so irritating. It's the movie's fault the movie's bad, not Freddie Mercury's fault. Shit.
I know. I would still like to do a graphic novel about him someday. I think it would be pretty incredible. But as far as that goes, nothing in the works. But if any bands or artists want to talk to me about doing something official or unofficial with their blessing, I'd be happy to jump into that well again, because doing graphic music bios is a lot of fun.
So to you, like, what do you think are the requirements for a band or a musician being a good fit for a graphical music bio?
They have to have a pretty eventful career. Things have to happen that are wild and crazy, and they have to have kind of a visual stage presence. So they're like the Monkees would be a really fun to do. Alice Cooper, Elton John, George Michael, someone like that, with a really good history and a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of great albums. I think it would be really fun to write about.
Yeah, those definitely sound amazing. Do you want to talk a little bit about your other work as well?
Yes. Before this Bowie book, I did miniseries for IDW called Satellite Falling, and that was the space opera. I worked with an artist named Stephen Thompson, who's done a lot of Star Trek comics, so this is kind of a Star Trek, Star Wars homage, and it turned out really well. And it came together great, had a really good protagonist and a really interesting cast of alien characters, and that was a wonderful experience. Before that, I did Amala's Blade with Michael Dialinas, who's gone on to do The Woods at Boom Studios and a lot of TMNT comics, and he's an amazing artist, and that was really, really fun to do as well. Coming up after Bowie, I have a lot of projects in the pitch stage, so I'm looking forward to hopefully Bowie giving my career kind of a kick in the butt and getting some of those independent projects going, and maybe some attention from the big two as well would be nice.
Well, I'm taking a look at Satellite Falling, and it looks really striking. When did this come out?
The trade paperback came out in 2018, but the majority of the series was in 2017, and it got a lot of great reviews. Reviews were solid. The sales weren't too great, as typical for indie comics, but we still had a lot of fun working on it, and would love to come back to that universe again someday.
So how did you start writing comics?
I was a writing major in school, did a lot of comic book journalism. Before I graduated, I interned at Comics Buyer's Guide and got a whole look at that side of things. I was freelanced writing about comics for many years for CBG and many other places, and kind of got the comic book writing bug around that time. Did several webcomics in the early 2000s that no one should Google because they're all pretty universally terrible. But
Okay.
but those did lead to a couple of short DC stories about Bizarro and about Captain Marvel, Shazam, and those were a lot of fun to do for DC's anthologies, and that kind of led to those independent comics I mentioned. So everything's a starting point, even if you're not too much of a fan of your old work. It's still a place to start and get better, and learning as you go and as you get published is definitely the best way to do comics.
I believe it. But yeah, it's such a recurring theme. So many people I'll talk to on the show who will be like, first I did these webcomics, please don't Google them, they're terrible. It's like probably one of the most said phrases on this show. And yet here all these people are on my show now. So
it's everything. It did have some of that stuff did have fans, so people did seem to like it at the time. Even if I can't stand reading it now, it had a place and time.
Who do you feel like were influential on your writing for comics?
For me, for writing comics, I think that let me think. Chris Claremont, Peter David, Kurt Busiek, guys like that were really kind of Brian Michael Bendis, guys that were really dialogue heavy and really focused on characters and looking beyond the fight scenes and just really what was happening. Astro City was definitely a big influence on my writing because he kind of went around the corner and showed what the regular people were doing amidst all the fighting. I thought that was a really novel approach. That was one of my favorites very early on. So people like that. Gail Simone is an amazing writer. Very lots of humor, lots of great dialogue, lots of amazing original characters. Secret Six is one of my all-time favorites. And so she's definitely influenced and also is also a great person as well. Most of my writing and artist influences are people that I would actually respect as human beings. If I find out that a creator has done bad things, they pretty much lose me as a fan and as a peer, and I pretty much drop them like a hot potato and get rid of all their comics. So as long as they're not being abusive toward anyone and they're not awful, horrible MAGA or people like that, then we're golden. Then I'll still read your stuff and still be a fan.
My friend and I did a big deep dive into Secret Six just about, I guess, several months ago on the podcast. And that stuff really holds up. It's so fucking good.
To read some of her other stuff around that period that I haven't read yet, like Batgirl and Birds of Prey. Those are next on my list.
Yeah, totally. And I think like when we're talking about these different periods of comics, like there's so many people, it's like built into the team, I feel like a lot of the artists that she was working with on Secret Six did better work than the artists she was working with on the other books, but they're still really enjoyable, and you should check them out.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely the artist does make a difference as far as the
Yes.
quality of a book. The writer can do the best they can, and if the artist doesn't bring their A game, it can mess it up. But let's see, I think most of the artists that she's worked with have been really good. Like Daily Lasham on Secret Six, I think, was
Yep,
really
yep.
good, really really good pairing, and they were like a match made in heaven. I really like how he drew Bane and some of the other characters, and I need to go reread that whole thing again now.
Well, I mean, it was just such a dream team having you team up with Mike and Laura. Like, I really think that they're two of the greatest comic artists living, period. And you got them working on, like, the greatest musician, artist, creator, whatever. It's not a competition, but, like, let's be honest, like, Bowie is the greatest. So,
He is,
so
and working with Mike and Laura is a bucket list. I get to check that off, which I never thought I'd be able to do. Growing up reading his Madman, and then reading X Force and Ecstatics, and loving the shit out of that, and just being able to work with that guy and once in my life is pretty incredible. So I think that I get to say that I did a book with him, and I think that even, no matter what else I do after this, I've got that. So great.
any other comics from him you want to give a shout out to?
He's doing a Dark Horse. I don't know if it's a one shot or a miniseries. It's coming out this year called X-Ray Robot, and it's set in the Mad Men universe. And this, just from the art and the premise of the story, meaning so I'll be one of the first in line to buy that. It looks incredible. So
So it's set in the Madman universe. Oh,
I
wow.
think so, and it looks really really original and unusual. And of course, him and Peter Milligan are reteaming to do more with the X Force Ecstatics characters this year, and so I'm excited about that. Obviously.
Yeah, it is a very exciting time in X-Men land right now.
Yeah, one of the Marvel's things that I'm reading right now is the John Hickman run on X-Men, like everyone else, and really being blown away by that. And that's forcing me to up my game as a writer, because if he can put something like this together with these amazing artists and amazing designers, then I think the rest of us need to kind of step up a little bit to either that or quit altogether.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Can you let our listeners know where they can find your work online?
You can always talk to me on Twitter at Tropical Steve, and I'm also on Instagram at Son of Stev, and you can email me anytime through the link on that site. Send me a direct message, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone. And you can find my work in Barnes & Noble, at your local comic shop, and on Amazon.
Yeah, your book is really everywhere now. I've seen people posting photos of it on display in different bookstores.
Apparently, it got out a little early, which is pretty cool, because that means I'm going to have to go to my local Barnes & Noble tomorrow and see if it's on the shelf there and take a picture.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely, folks. Go out and get it in the store. It's a gorgeous book, and I think would be an amazing gift as well as thing for yourself.
Spend all of your gift cards that you got on Christmas.
Yes. So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope that wasn't too much geeking out about a very specific topic for you, but I suppose if you've listened to my podcast episodes about the Venture Brothers, you've probably heard me talk about David Bowie at great length before. I am always here for that. I will talk about David Bowie till I'm blue in the face. There's always more to say. I definitely, I'm so happy to have an opportunity to talk with you about something that combines my two great loves of comics and in Bowie-ness. One thing I have said on Twitter, and I'll say it here because it'll never happen, so it's not like I'm ruining my own IP. But whenever the Jack Kirby book from the Fourth World that he did as a postscript to it, which is The Hunger Dogs, which was a continuation of the New Gods series, I was thinking about the Hunger Dogs, and I was thinking about Diamond Dogs, and I was like, I just really wish that there was a Hunger Dogs and Diamond Dogs mashup, combining like a musical, like using Bowie's designs for the Hunger Dogs, but doing the story from Diamond Dogs or some configuration of this. And like David Bowie would be Metron. Like David Bowie is Metron in that story. David Bowie would be Metron.
I know there's
Actually,
I wanted to mention there's a Bowie art gallery going on during a store signing I have on January 11th at Tate's Comics in Fort Lauderdale, and I know several artists have contributed Bowie pieces. I don't think anyone's done a New Gods mashup, but people should stop by and take a look.
Awesome. Are there any other events coming up that folks should know about?
Mike and Laura are doing another signing around then at Powell's in Portland.
Cool.
I think it's in Beaverton. I used to go to Powell's all the time. I grew up in Portland, and it's a huge bookstore. It's probably the biggest bookstore you've ever been in your life, and they're doing a signing and Q&A there. So people should go, depending on what coast you live on, you should either check out their signing or ours, and if you're in between, we can't help you, but hopefully we'll wind up at a convention or a comic shop near you sometime soon.
Yeah, it broke my heart that your book wasn't out in time to be on my panel about comics and music at New York Comic Con this past year. I think we actually chatted about that. I was like, God fucking damn it. So I have to find another excuse to pitch it in the future. So I guess as my last question to you is, okay, so I'm casting Bowie as Metron. Who do you cast David Bowie as in a comics-related project?
I think Bowie as Doctor Strange would have been really cool if they had done that. I think he would have been. I mean, he was amazing Nikolai Tesla, so that's kind of a natural extension of that. So I think that if Marvel had act together in the '80s doing really good movies and cast Bowie as Doctor Strange, I think that would have been really neat.
I actually also have this is really purely aesthetic more than anything else. I have a Kevin Wada commission on my wall that's of Nightwing in the old glam rock Nightwing jumpsuit as Ziggy Stardust.
That's awesome. I love Kevin Wada's work. He's amazing. You'll have to send that to me. I want to see that.
Yeah, I'll post you a picture. I've posted it before, but I'm always happy to post it again. But I was like, Kevin Wada is an amazing artist. I'm only going to be able to commission one thing. What is it going to be? And I had written a review of one of the new Teen Titans themed book from the DC relaunch, the Convergence, and I named the name of it like The Rise and Fall of Starfire and the Spiders from Tamarin or something like that. And that's when I was like, oh yeah, no, I got to do a Ziggy Stardust New Teen Titans mashup. Like, I'm not even that big of a New Teen Titans fan, but he's wearing a glam rock jumpsuit already, so you're already half the way there.
Yeah, his first Nightwing costume is totally disco, and that fits. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So for Graphic Policy Radio, we are on every podcast platform you can think of. Please like us and review us. I would love to get some new reviews in. You can find me on Twitter a little bit too much at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Elana_Brooklyn. And of course, graphicpolicy.com for all of your comics, news, and reviews. And as we like to say here, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.